is David Ellison. David has spoken many, many times here at Open Circle. You can tell by the audience participation here today. David is a historian, an author, a teacher, a storyteller, and an actor. He grew up a devout Catholic. He went to Catholic school all through college, and for 5 years he taught at a Catholic school. Then, at some later point, he traveled, and I think he went to Europe and opened up his eyes to new life and underwent a huge transformation. And that's what today's talk will be about. My experience of David is no matter what he talks about, it's engaging, entertaining, and fun. So, my friend, David Ellison, without further ado, welcome David Ellison.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Very good. And I have to say, I'm shocked. Thank you all for coming. I never expected this many people for a talk on existentialism. In any event, first I'll begin with my own joke. How many existentialists does it take to screw in a light bulb? Just two. One to screw it in and one to observe how the light bulb itself symbolizes a single incandescent beacon of subjective reality in another world of endless absurdity reaching out towards a maudlin cosmos of nothing. Anyways, just before we do anything, I'm not here to proselytize. I'm not trying to convince you. I have no claim that I am right. I'm merely going to tell you my journey. However, I suspect, just given that we are all expats living abroad, that in your own way you have chosen the path less traveled by, I suspect that most of you will see some of yourself in my story and my journey. Let me begin with a gift for you all for coming out. Today, here, now, I am going to share with you the truth. Here it is. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, mighty creator of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Through him all things were made, for us men and for our salvation, blah, blah, blah. I had to memorize this, but it was very assuring because there it was. Before I even asked the questions, I had the answers, the truth. But wait, there's more. As Noam Chomsky said, there is also secular dogma, and that is the United States of America, the world's first modern democracy since the fall of the Roman Republic, which is true. It's the bastion of goodness and freedom on earth. We single-handedly defeated Hitler and won World War II, and we were God's chosen country to single-handedly stand up to those godless communists. Everyone admires us. As President Bush said, they hate us for our freedoms. Now, this is for 2.5 decades of my life. This was my credo. I believed this hook, line, and sinker. And not anymore. I'm going to come back to this, but this is my current credo. And it goes like this. This moment is a gift. This day is a gift. And there are many gifts. Life is a mystery. Life is fleeting. There is great beauty. There is senseless suffering. And so find compassion. Strive for freedom. Accept what is. Let go of ego. Look, listen, and laugh. I'll come back to that. First, a talk on existentialism, and I claim no expertise here. It began, for the most part, after World War II, I think largely in response to fascism. And on a spectrum, fascism is here and existentialism is on the other side. And if the existentialists share one thing, it is an absolute hatred of fascism. People like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre, Camus, and my favorite, Erich Fromm. The philosophy, let me just very briefly, what is the philosophy of existentialism? Aristotle, the old philosophy, believed that essence precedes existence. And so God or the gods design what is its essence in their mind, its mind, God's mind, her mind, and then create it. So essence precedes existence. First there's the idea, and then there's creation. And existentialists believe the opposite, that creation precedes essence, at least as far as human beings are concerned. First we are created, and so sorry, you have to decide who and what you are. That was not predetermined. I'm going to mispronounce his name. I'm just going to quote a few of them to define what existentialism is. Gigon said, existentialists hold that humans have no pre-given purpose or essence laid out for them by God or by nature. It is up to each one of us to decide who and what we are. Or Jean-Paul Sartre said, man is condemned to be free because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. So existentialists believe in radical free choice, radical individualism, and radical personal responsibility. The central tenet of existentialism is that personal freedom, individual responsibility, and deliberate choice are essential to the pursuit of self-discovery and determining life's meaning. Nietzsche said, you have your way, I have my way. As for the right way, the correct way, the only way, it does not exist, which has led to many to accuse existentialism of moral relativism. Robert Frost said, accept no one's definition of your life, define yourself. The poem Invictus, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. And Carl Jung said, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light of meaning in the darkness of mere being. Before we go on, just a quick talk on freedom. And this is sort of a corollary that existentialists believe. They believe that most people are afraid of freedom and responsibility. They fear it. They cling to credos and dogmas and authority. Erich Fromm, the great German psychoanalyst and existentialist, wrote a whole book called Escape from Freedom. And he wrote, free man is by necessity insecure. Thinking man, by necessity, uncertain. Who wants that? It's much better to be an evangelical and to know that you have the truth, to know, to be certain, to be self-righteous, to have no fear of death. It's very appealing. Aldous Huxley wrote, the great part of the population is not very intelligent, dreads responsibility, and desires nothing better than to be told what to do. Provided the rulers do not interfere with its material comforts and its cherished beliefs, it is perfectly happy to let itself be ruled. And one of my current heroes, Chris Hedges, though he is a real downer, I'll quote him. He says, the rhetoric we use to describe ourselves is so disconnected from reality that it has induced collective schizophrenia. America, as it is discussed in public forums by politicians, academics, and the media, is a fantasy. A Disney-fied world of make-believe. The worse it gets, the more we retreat into illusions, the longer we fail to name and confront our physical and moral decay. The more demagogues who peddle illusions and fantasies become empowered. Those who acknowledge the truth, beginning with the stark fact that we are no longer a democracy, wander like ghosts around the edges of society, reviled as enemies of hope. The mania for hope works as an anesthetic. And I would add that anyone who dares challenge the narrative is derided and cast out and just said, well, you're one of them, they're conspiracy theorists. We live in dangerous times. Quick word on freedom. How free are we? I mean, do we decide to be born? Do we decide to be born where and when? Did I decide to be a man? Do we decide to be Canadian or Angolan? Rich or poor? How much of who and what we are determined by our culture, our language? We have a reptilian brain that is still there that, keeps us forever afraid. Recent research on the brains of kids, that kids born into poverty, and so grow up in tremendous insecurity, have their brains hardwired for fight and flight. How free are they? How many have heard of the famous book, When Past is Present? When the deficiencies of our upbringing and our suffering of our youth follows us into adulthood, and that we end up doing irrational things. How free are we? How about PTSD? Addictions. Most of our culture conspires against freedom, for conformity. So existentialism believes in radical freedom, but how free are we? I'll come back to that. Let's talk about me, shall we? And my personal, my journey as I escaped from Dogma. First of all, I was a late bloomer. I have to say that my husband Edgar is over here, and he left most dogmas when you were, what, 10, 12? I clung to them into my 20s. Catholic grade school, Catholic college, Catholic high school. I taught in Catholic schools. I was a true believer in both the Catholic and the United States dogma. I was going to become a priest. Whew, dodged that bullet. I was quite thoughtless, and I was quite obedient. I made no decisions. My brother went to the University of Notre Dame, so that's where I went. I mean, I never even considered going anywhere else. I just followed the path that was laid out for me. My job was to obey and to please the adults in the room. What were the results of that I recognize only in retrospect? I mean, one of them is I became a perfectionist, which meant self-deprecating and self-loathing, because I never lived up to being perfect. But I was also smug in the knowledge that I had the truth. My brothers and I discussed this. My brother Tim once said, and I've never forgotten it, he just said, when I was in 4th grade, I knew I was going to hell. Now, how effed up is that? I mean, but I believe that. How many of any of you knew you were going to hell in 4th grade or whatever? And then just the sexual repression. I mean, these are sort of jokes, but they're exaggerated truths. Sex is evil and filthy and nasty, and so to be saved for the one you love. Or this one. I saw this on a button once, and I just burst out laughing, but the humor, sort of spoke to me. It said, every time you masturbate, God drowns a kitten. But consider, psychologists now know, I think it's like over 90% of young teenage boys engage in habitual masturbation, but the church told them, you are filthy, and it's just in 7th grade, and I still remember this. I remember exactly where I was. I was in the boys' restroom in the urinal next to Charlie Saluan. I still remember this, and we pinky swore that right after high school we were going to join the army. And oh God, please God, let there be a war so that we can go off and be killed. Because the nuns had assured us that God, the United States was God's chosen country, and anyone who died defending the United States went straight to heaven. And so in 7th grade we said, let's just cut to the chase, shall we? Let's just go get ourselves killed and go to heaven. 7th grade, I believed that. And then something occurred to me. This is far more recent. Towards the end of my career, I taught high school U.S. history, World War II, and there in the textbook was a picture of Hitler draping his arm over a Hitler Youth in his uniform. And I looked at it and I went, oh my God. And it just hit me. I would have been a Nazi. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do, I believed the dogma, all I wanted to do was please the adults. I was thoughtless. If I had been born into World War II, into pre-World War II Germany, I would have been first in line. I was a Boy Scout. I loved the flags and the rank. I would have been a Hitler Youth. And what sort of atrocities would I have gone on to do? That really is the dangers of dogma and thoughtlessness. And it has filled me with compassion, even for the goons of Homeland Security that ripped children out of the arms of their parents. It was heinous, but for the grace of God or dumb luck went I. Dogmas is a very dangerous thing, indeed. So how the heck did I escape? And I look back now, only in retrospect, and suddenly things begin to fall into place. And I really put it into 4 great decisions in my life. Each of them in their own way, and it makes sense only in retrospect, sort of existentialistic. Moments when I stepped forward and for the first time or had the courage to make a decision just for me. And the first one was when I went to the college that my brother had chosen for me. I just followed in the footsteps. But my father had said, liberal arts education is just a waste. The only good college education, business or engineering. Liberal arts, what a waste of time. So guess what I did? I didn't just do the liberal arts, I did a great books program. This is, the great books of Aristotle, Aquinas, dead white men. I went back and majored in, it was called the Great Books Program. There were only a few in the country. And I remember I brought the brochure home and put it on the coffee table so my parents could see. My father wouldn't even read it. He was just sick. But to my father's credit, more on this, he just kept silent. But that was my first decision, is sort of stepping out, making my own decision. And I decided I wanted to study, in a backhanded way, philosophy, which at a Catholic university, you think, we already know what the truth is. Why do we study philosophy? And it didn't make sense to me, but, there I went. And I thought, well, maybe it's the history of how we finally came to the truth. But there was a few things during that study that really affected me. And one was, during some discussion, they talked about the philosophical journey and what motivates humans to go on this journey. And they said there are 2 things that could motivate you. One is wonder, and the other is doubt. Wonder or doubt. Now, wonder is a very positive emotion. I want to figure this amazing universe out. And doubt is, they gave me the answers before I even answered the question and told me I'd better, like hell, believe it or else. But now I'm daring to question, and that's a very scary thing. And I remember in this discussion, it was a seminar, I just said, I don't think I'm going to raise my kids Catholic. And the whole room was aghast, like, oh my God, how could you? And I just said, I don't want them going through life motivated by doubt. I want them to be motivated by wonder. And then secondly, let's see, my senior year, and they saved this for our senior year, we were finally allowed to look at existentialism. And Dr. Pasquale, I still remember him, one of my favorite professors, and we had to read the Brothers Karamazov, which is considered to be the quintessential existentialistic novel. And in the middle of the novel is this apropos of nothing story within a story called The Grand Inquisitor. And the story is, it just interrupts this novel, and one of the characters tells the story of the Grand Inquisitor, and Jesus has come back. And once again, he has been arrested and brought before the Grand Inquisitor. And the Grand Inquisitor, it's a monologue of the Grand Inquisitor, who turns to Jesus and says, I know who you are, and I'm going to put you to death again. They don't want you. You offered freedom. They don't want freedom. They want us. And this is just a quote. The people, this is from the Grand Inquisitor, thy people feel fully sure and satisfied of their freedom, and that only since they themselves and of their own free will delivered that freedom unto our hands by placing it submissively at our feet. And I read this, I mean, that was scary stuff for me to read. And I couldn't really, it just sort of sat there as sort of like, oh my God. And I didn't know what to do with it. And so I set it aside, and then my other favorite professor, Dr. Stephen Rogers, he had this quote that I've never forgotten. He said, so much of education is, quote, so much grain stored against a winter we never expect to come. And so I set it aside to go, I can't deal with that yet. And but the other thing Dr. Pasquale said, he said repeatedly, he said the most important thing is to live an authentic life. And he said it with such earnestness. I'm like, well, duh. I mean, I'm authentic, said the closeted man to myself. You know, as if, and I was later learned to live an authentic life is probably the most difficult thing to do. And he knew it. And he planted that seed, strive for authenticity. Anyways, that was my first decision, to study the liberal arts, to challenge the dogma. The second great decision, and this I think was probably the greatest decision of my life, and it remains one of the biggest mysteries. After college, I went abroad. I didn't just, travel for a few weeks. I went to live abroad, to immerse myself in a foreign culture and a foreign language. And I look back now, where the hell did that come from? I have no idea. There was no modeling. No one had gone before me from my family to do what I was about to do. And my grandparents had died, left a few $1,000s to me, just enough to get me abroad. But I just, at some point, I realized that I had a very narrow worldview. White, Catholic, upper middle class. And I said, I think there's more to life, and I want to go find it. Whatever possessed me, I will never know. But it is by far the single greatest decision that I ever made, was to go. I went to Europe because in my art traditions course we had studied Gothic architecture and I had to see it for myself. I chose Spain because I had just studied Spanish, and I thought, well, why start from scratch? Let's just go there. And so for a year and a half, I lived in Spain. And it did immerse myself in a foreign culture and learn to speak Spanish. I'd have to say my mom later told me that as I left them to get on the plane, my dad turned to my mom and said, he'll be back in 2 months with his tail between his legs. I was gone for a year and a half. Yeah. I have to tell you, but that was the beginning of, a lot of the loss of naivete. I taught English there, and one day I was teaching, I just began a brand new class to some adult at a Berlitz type school called In Lingua. And it was a brand new class, maybe 8 or 10 adults there, and about 10 minutes into the class, this one student raised his hand and said, excuse me, are you American? And I went, why, yes. And he slammed his book, got up, and walked out. And I went, what? And that was the beginning of the loss of my naivete. And even, I quickly learned that this is when Spain had just gotten out of Franco, and it was being discussed, would they enter NATO? They hated the United States. I mean, almost universally. I remember I went to a political rally, Felipe Gonzalez, who would later become the socialist president, and it was just all this anti-Americanism, and I was, you know, it was scary to just realize how, I mean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, all my notions of how the world saw us came tumbling down. I also learned that the American culture is not the only one or even necessarily the best. And I'll just use one example. Still in the United States, at Notre Dame, they, you know, almost every room had a bar because the culture was every weekend to just get drunk. And even so, I remember towards the end of my career, I started teaching at the high school, and I tried to meet the younger, you know, in my career as a teacher, my colleagues had been my friends. So I was at a new school, let me go make them my friends, but they were all younger. I suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm the old guard. And I went out to them, and they all talked about my colleagues, said, yeah, so then I got wasted. And then you went to teach? But anyways, that's, you know, that's the culture of the United States. Now, when I was in Spain, I was there for a year and a half. Do you know how many drunk people I saw among my friends? But every weekend, and they, you know, Friday, Saturday nights, if you go out to the local park, there they are with a guitar, un porron, which is this big flask of wine, they're passing it around, everyone's having a good time. They don't get drunk. If anyone got drunk, I mean, everything would stop. They'd go, David, are you okay? What's the matter? And I suddenly realized, I looked back at my culture and said, oh my God, we are sick. And so you can see how this began to transform me. They tried to tell me what was going on in Central America at the time, because the Spaniards felt tremendous kinship with Latin America. And you know, what was going on in El Salvador and Guatemala, and I just said, that's lies, lies. I know that's not true. But I filed it away. I had to read a book. I mean, I didn't have to. I chose to read a book to, you know, learn more of Spanish vocabulary, and I don't know why I picked up this book. It was called Requiem for un Campesino Español. Requiem for a Spanish peasant. It begins on the first anniversary of the death of a peasant, and the priest is saying the Mass of Requiem, and so recounts the story of this Spanish peasant, this young kid full of idealism, and saw the injustice, and tried to stand up to end it, and then was murdered. And the person who turned him in was the priest, who had aligned himself with the wealthy. And I was like, what? And so I asked, you know, my Spanish friends, and they looked at me and said, well, now aren't you some kind of special kind of stupid? They just said, you know, the Catholic Church and the priests have always aligned themselves with the wealthy. What? And then they introduced me to Spanish music, and this one song really spoke to me. It's by Juan Manuel Serrat, and he put to music the poetry of Antonio Machado. And this one, it's called Caminante, no hay camino. Caminante son tus huellas el camino y nada más. Caminante, no hay camino. Se hace camino al andar. Pilgrim, your footprints are the road, nothing more. Pilgrim, there is no road. You make it as you travel. Became my favorite song, and at the time I didn't understand, Dave, that's existentialism. You know, all of this, the seeds being put away. And just traveling instilled within me a love of travel, an adventure, of following my own heart. And I have to tell you, it's one of my greatest laments of today. I know what a great thing traveling and living abroad was for me. How many graduating seniors in the United States today can do it? We've saddled them with debt. And so the greatest gift of my life is now denied to most American kids. When I got home, my mom got me this little poster. And it made sense to me only years later. It was just a quote from Helen Keller. And it went, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. And she gave that to me, and she said, I saw this, and it made me think of you. I didn't understand she was paying me a compliment. Part of it must have been, who are you? You know, but it was a backhanded, I admire your courage. Third decision I made in defiance of everything was to become a teacher. And this really made my father sick. I mean, he just like, why did we waste all this money on your education for you to become a teacher? But I followed my heart. And I have to say, my father came round after about 5 years of coming home every year, just gushing with my joy and my stories about how much fun I was having. After 5 years later, he pulled me aside and he goes, well, this education thing, I guess it's a good thing. He came round. And I have to say, in homage to my parents, they always let me follow my heart. And in one of my articles that I ended up I wrote, my parents let me follow my heart. And that is why, for as long as my parents lived, my heart always brought me back home to them. Anyways, so I taught history among many other things, and that, the first thing is my history teachers had convinced me that I hated history. So I said, and it turns out I love history, and I said I'm not going to teach the way they taught me, which meant I had to go back and reteach myself everything. And I have to tell you, it usually led to moments of horror. For example, I taught 8th grade history, which in California was the first part of U.S. history. And for the first time, I had to take a good, strong look at Manifest Destiny, the annihilation of Native Americans, and the Mexican-American War, which was nothing less than a war of imperialism. And I looked at it and went, well, that's not what they taught me. Oh my God. And then I had to teach 7th grade world history, including the Middle Ages. I got to tell you, the Catholic Church comes off looking mighty bad between, the Inquisition, the Crusades, Galileo, the divine right of kings that was, used to. This religious belief was used to prop up feudalism. To say you are born a serf, your job is to be a serf, to suffer, and if you obey, then in heaven, you'll have your reward. And if you challenge this, that is divine right of kings. If you challenge the king, you're challenging God. You're going to. I just thought, oh my God, this is terrible. And then later in my career, I had to teach the second part of U.S. history, and to go back and teach it to myself, and had a good look at our age of imperialism at the turn of the last century. And then I looked at World War I. Talk about a senseless war. An entire continent losing its mind. And it's not like most wars. The U.S. Civil War, there was something on the table. It was state versus federal. It was the issue of slavery. But there was nothing on the table in World War I. We can talk about what led to it. But, who was right? Where's the criteria? It was just everyone trying to kill each other. And that was really hard. And then even harder for me was, why did the United States join this bloodbath? It made no sense to me. And, the stated narratives came tumbling down. How many have heard of the Lusitania? They were sinking our ships, for God's sakes. Well, why were we sending our ships out there in the first place? The Lusitania was loaded to the gills with munitions. It was a legitimate military target. Germany took out a full-page ad, said, please don't get on this ship. We will sink it. Please don't do this. And then in my nonfiction book club, we read, it's called Dead Weight by Eric Larkin, which was devastating, in which it comes out that they'd broken the German code. This U-boat that sank the Lusitania, they'd been tracking the whole time. They knew exactly where it was, and they knew the Lusitania was sinking, was heading straight for it. And they gave orders that it was the only cruise ship afloat with 4 stacks instead of 3. It had 4 engines. It was the fastest ship on the water. In order to save fuel, it was told, turn off one of the engines. They could have taken the northern route around Ireland. Instead, they were told to go right into the jaws of that ship in order to get the U.S. to join this war. It just... And you think if we hadn't joined the war, they would have fought each other to a stalemate. They just would have there never would have been a Treaty of Versailles, which of course set everything up for Hitler. Anyways, after World War I, there was the Nye Commission. Senator Nye asked, why did we go into this war? They had a full investigation. They came up with 2. There are more, but their commission came up with 2. Who was pushing for war? The banks. We'd loan England $20 billion. If they lost, we'd never see the money again. We needed to make sure that they won. And it was the munitions companies. They pushed for war. We had no business in that war. And there was a reason we became isolationists after World War I. If you want to see a great thing, I made my students watch this. I'll give you some homework. This Sainsbury chocolate commercial. Just Google chocolate commercial, World War I. It's just a stunningly beautiful commercial of what actually happened one Christmas, where both sides across no man's land began to sing Christmas Carol, and the next morning they climbed out and they played soccer and realized they loved each other, and like, what the hell are we doing here? Until their generals ordered them back in their trenches, and anyways. But the other thing is, if you're a teacher, you commit yourself to a life of study. And I continued studying all things. I studied religions and the history of religions, and I came to believe that histories, like everything, come and go. Most of them are, they are human creations. We create God in our own image. We do this in order to explain and add order to the universe and to assuage our fear of freedom and our fear of death. And it also explains evil and suffering. It's okay, that senseless suffering of that child, because he or she's in heaven now. It's all okay. It's greatly comforting. I took a good long look at the Catholic Church, a misogynist church that puts down women. It's hierarchy. It preaches against contraception and so dooms entire continents to poverty and political chaos. And by the way, there's if you're part of Facebook, Jim Palmer, he was a former evangelical minister. He escaped, like me, and has a wonderful blog on Facebook in which he goes back and sort of gives a very different perspective. I looked, for me, what became my Bible and what became Revelation is just the universe, creation, life. And I looked at the history of the earth and of the cosmos, and, so sorry, shit happens. I looked at the Black Death, a third to half of Europe, just, oops, sorry, bye. I looked at the Native Americans. That was inevitable. You can blame Columbus, but sooner or later, someone was going to come here and bring the germs, and somewhere between 20 to 56 million Native Americans were going to be wiped off the planet, the greatest genocide, in human history. Oops. In fact, there's so many died, they now think it changed the climate. And then if you look at archaeological history, just mass extinctions, there's been 5 great mass extinctions, either due to volcanoes or asteroids. Oops. 99% of the species on the face of the earth that have existed are gone. 99%. Of the 5 billion, we estimate only 8.7 million remain. The dinosaurs, the age of reptiles, lasted for 200 million years. Homo sapiens, we've been around for 200,000. Do we really believe we're going to last forever? You just look at the moon and the craters on the moon. Our future is written there. We don't know when, but like every other species, we will pass on. And when I looked at this, it was just sort of a lost notion of providence and of a benevolent God. Species come and go, planet, whole universes come and go, nothing lasts. We're just building castles in the sand. Carl Sagan wrote, "The universe seems neither benign nor hostile, merely indifferent." And then by happenstance, I got involved in the refugee movement in Texas. I was teaching in Texas at the time, and at a party, I met a Guatemalan refugee. They asked me to go talk to this young kid, because I spoke Spanish. They said he's got no one to talk to. I said, cool. I went over, this was a kid, talk about PTSD, and I went back to the host and I said, what the heck is going on with that kid? And he said, didn't you know? The army killed both his parents, and then they came for him. And if the U.S. immigration captures him, he will be sent back to certain death. So we're trying to get him into Canada where he will be safe. And who armed those Guatemalan soldiers? Who who destroyed their democracy and installed one of the most ruthless dictatorships on the planet? And so my education continued. I got involved in the refugee movement. And that was the end of, sort of my naivete about the United States. You might be able to explain some of that away as just we lost our minds with anti-communism, but if you keep studying, you'll look at countries like Haiti, Ghana, Malaysia. There was no anti-communism there. It was just unadulterated neo-colonialism. And so that was the end of that dogma about the United States. And then you look at things like the war on drugs, and Ehrlichman, Nixon's right-hand man, later came out, we didn't give a damn about drugs. That was just, it was just a tool used to go after our two enemies, those who opposed the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. So you have to look at the stranglehold that corporations now have on the government and on the media. And if you doubt me, just type in Google, type in oligarchy, Princeton. And the University of Princeton did a study, and they just said, any notions of a democracy still surviving in the United States is just naivete. And so there I was, after all of this, sort of with, I've lost my faith in God, I've lost my faith in the United States, I was bereft. And, this is an existentialistic moment of despair. And UNESCO said, of existentialists, cut off from his religious, metaphysical, and transcendental roots, man is lost. All his actions become senseless, absurd, and useless. I was full of disillusionment and rage and depression. And a therapist once said to me, he just said, the one emotion I don't allow myself to feel is grief. And he said, Dave, you've never grieved the loss of your faith, have you? And just as an anecdote, one day we were studying something to do with race relations in the United States. I think it was the middle school. And I was speaking about something with just my rage and my sense of betrayal. Look at this. And this one young kid was just sitting there looking at me with befuddlement. He must have been all of 12 or 13. And he finally raised his hand and said, geez, Mr. Ellis, my mom taught me this when I was 10 years old. And so I was guilty of a little bit of white privilege as well, fed to my naivete. But meanwhile, there is another side. I have always loved hiking. And nature has become my church. And I go out and I immerse myself in nature. And I'm filled with awe and humility and the love of beauty. And I've come to believe we're just all like the trees. We are manifestation of life. And our time is fleeting. And just as the tree will be recycled, I will be recycled. And our time is very brief. Let's make the most of this. We are all stardust. And all of life is sacred. Fourth great decision, and I'm out of time, so I'm going to keep going. My fourth great decision was finally, very late in life, finally coming out of the closet. And finally, when I was 30 years old, I realized I haven't had an intimate relationship with anyone. Why? Because I'm running away from myself. I became a workaholic, one man making a difference in the world. It was all sick. And I finally went to a therapist, and he said, Dave, I can't tell you who you are, but I can tell you it's time to stop running away. And so at the age of 30, I finally began to come out of the closet, and it was a slippery slope indeed, let me tell you. Someone later said, damn, Dave, you didn't just come out of the closet, you blew the door off the hinges. And so I said, well, 15 years of closet is... But anyways, what does it mean to come out of the closet? It means you take the script that I'm going to, follow the script, get married, have my 2.5 kids, the dog and the white picket fence, and you have to chuck it. You have to say, I can't follow the script. I've got to make my own. What a blessing. So I think finally in my 30s, I finally understood what Dr. Pasquale had said, what it means to live an authentic life. It means to live a life of honesty, courage, responsibility, and critical thinking. Let's go back to freedom very quickly. Yes, so much of who we are is determined. But remember what those nuns did teach me. Who you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourselves is your gift back to Him. And I said, many of the decisions are still ours, and we still get to decide much of who we are. I don't believe we are born free, but I believe we can become freer. And life's journey, freedom is a journey, not a state. It involves education, but education is a double-edged sword. As Paulo Freire, the great Portuguese pedagogue he studied pedagogy. He just said, education is either used to oppress or to liberate, but it can liberate. We can free ourselves from our past, from our reptilian brain. A lot of that involves being very, very thoughtful. And I believe meditation, sort of becoming intensely aware, writing in your journal about your life and saying, what's going on? Socrates said the unmeditated life is not worth living. I would say yes, because by thinking about everything, you become freer to make different decisions. Viktor Frankl wrote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And that space is our power to choose our response. In that response lies our growth and our freedom. And so no matter what happens, you want to just take a breath. And then many times you can say, this isn't about me. I don't need to take this personally. So for me, my existentialistic purpose in life is to become free and to help others become free. Because as I look around the world, I look at women throughout the world, my next talk, they are not free. I look at gays who cannot be themselves. They are not free. 50 million people, more than ever in the history of the world, 50 million people currently live in some form of slavery. So for me, my purpose is to try to become freer myself and to try to enable other people to do the same. And I've got all sorts of other stuff, but I think I'm way out of time. So I'm going to stop there.
Give it up. Give it up. Wow. What a treat. Okay, so we're going to open up for a little while for some questions, for a little Q&A. I'm going to come around with the mic. When I do, please stand up and ask your question. Don't do it without the mic. Okay, I'm going to go back here.
You said that one of your early crucial decisions was to break the mold and after college travel to Europe. And you said, where in hell did that come from? And I wonder if it was just the opposite. Would you ever consider that was divine intervention?
That's a very good question. And I will say this, that there's an interesting moment when I was, before I got to Spain, I was in, I think it's outside, I wanted to get a picture of that stupid castle that Disney used, Fusen I think it's called. And I ended up missing my train back as I went on a hike up to the top of this mountain and for the first time saw snow-capped mountains arrayed, and it was a really awful rainy day. And right then when I saw, the first time in my life, and something that I never thought would happen, and there were snow-capped mountains, and I was just overwhelmed with emotion and awe, and right then the sun came out. And the first thing that came to me was the thought, this is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. And so it was a real moment. And I have to say, if I had only my own life to look at, I would believe in providence. And I will say this, that I have sort of, and I didn't get to this, so I'm going to take a brief moment, but sort of my core values are gratitude and humility, compassion, acceptance, and humor. But I have a hard time looking at the lives of most other people on this planet and believing in that same level of providence. But that's just me. But I always say I lead a charmed existence. I am very, very fortunate.
Very good.
This is a little bit of change in subject. This is kind of a story about when I was about 12 years old.
No, we're not going to do stories. Thank you. Okay.
I guess the only question, sorry.
Yeah,
But
we're not going to.
anyone can come up here. If they let me up, they'll let you up. So.
Do you believe that the war that is going on is also bullets and machinery motivated?
A number of things, two things I'll say, some of which I never got to, the last 2.5 pages, oh well. But one thing is, it's very clear to me that the United States is now beholden entirely to the military, industrial, and pharmaceutical complexes. They call the shots. Period. End of story. So that's number one. But the other thing I said, about being an existentialist, at the end of the day, every existentialist has to say, my life matters, at least to me. And by extension, if my life matters, then so does everyone else's. And so a lot of the latter part of my talk talked about the importance of community, and that at the end of the day, no one is alone. We're all pilgrims on the same journey. And if you believe that every human life matters, then the fact that there are millions of children in the United States today without health care, sorry, morally wrong. And in the last few months, more than 10,000 children have been murdered in Palestine. I don't care where you come down on that issue, that is morally wrong.
Yes. Any other questions? Do I see any hands? Nope? Okay. Well, one right here.
Sure. On a philosophical level, how does existentialism square with my life matters, everyone's life matters? How do you, I'm looking for the right word. How do you reconcile, thank you. How do you reconcile radical freedom with a radical belief that everyone matters, and therefore your freedom has limits, and even your expression of your emotions, the expression of your beingness has limits because you are in connection. You must be in connection.
I think most, or at least dogmatic existentialism, talk about an oxymoron, does speak about just the meaninglessness, the great abyss of nothingness, that, whatever we are as human beings, we will cease to exist, so what's the point? And so there is this tremendous sense before the universe of just sort of meaninglessness and absurdity. But, I guess I just turn that on its head and say, but here I am, and I've got this thing, I have to make decisions knowing that I'm incredibly fallible, and knowing that I don't have the answers, and that the universe is far beyond my comprehension, but I still have to make decisions, and then accept the consequences for them. And let me read two things that I never got a chance to that speak to what you're saying. One is by Albert Camus, who wrote, and I love this, he said, perhaps then if we listen attentively, we shall hear amid the uproar of empires and nations a faint flutter of wings, the gentle stirring of life and hope. Some will say that this hope lies in a nation, others in a man. I believe rather that it is awakened, revived, and nourished by millions of solitary individuals whose deeds and works every day negate frontiers and the crudest implications of history. As a result, there shines forth fleetingly the ever-threatened truth that each and every man, on the foundation of his own suffering and joys, builds for all. That's from Camus. And then another one, and I love this. How many have seen the play Into the Woods? It's a phenomenal play that it's all about our, what do you call them, the fairy tales. And the first act sort of retells the fairy tales, and the second act turns them all on their head. But this one song is called No One Is Alone. And talk about an existentialistic song. Let me just quickly. It begins with this sort of the protagonist is wandering, just bereft, a moment of despair, and this other one sings to her, "Mother cannot guide you. Now you're on your own. Still, you're not alone. No one is alone. Truly, no one is alone. Others may deceive you. You decide what's good. You decide alone. But no one is alone. Mother isn't here now. Wrong things, right things, who knows what she'd say? Who can say what's true? Nothing's quite so clear now. Feel you've lost your way, but you decide. But you are not alone. Believe me, no one is alone. No one is alone. People make mistakes, fathers, mothers, people make mistakes. Honor their mistakes, fight for their mistakes. Everybody makes one another's terrible mistakes. Witches can be right. Giants can be good. You decide what's right. You decide what's good. But remember, no one is alone.
Thank you, David.